So I think that we're going to get to a point where our ability to tell our story with all these digital digressions is going to require discipline and a system. And that's why I wrote the book.
Hi, I'm Brilliant, your host for this show. I know that I'm incredibly blessed. As the son of self-made billionaires, I've seen the high price some people pay for success, and I've learned that money really can't buy happiness. But I've also had the good fortune to learn directly from many of the world's leading teachers. If you're ready to be, do, have, and give more, this podcast is for you. George Bernard Shaw said, "Life isn't about finding yourself. Life is about creating yourself." Perhaps there might be no one who understands that better than my guest today, Dr. Dennis Rebelo. He's author of a book called Story Like You Mean It: How to Build and Use Your Personal Narrative to Illustrate Who You Really Are. Dr. D is a professor, speaker, a career coach. He's the creator of the Peak Storytelling Model, a research-based method for crafting the narrative of who you are, what drives you, and why, which has been utilized by former professional athletes, turned nonprofit leaders, as well as entrepreneurs, CEOs, guidance professionals, and advisors around the world. One of the things that I love about this book and about Dr. D's approach is that it provides structure to really identifying what are those key moments of your life that you can share when you meet others, whether it's for an interview, whether it's upon an initial meeting, whether you're running into somebody you haven't seen in a long time. Anytime you have the chance to answer the question, tell me about yourself, which can be one of the most simple and most difficult questions to answer. So in this interview, we cover why that's so hard, how to do it well, why it matters, really taking ownership of claiming your identity, crafting and living an empowering message, as Dr. D says, bringing the future into the present. So with that, I hope you enjoy this conversation with my new friend, Dr. D. And by the way, you can learn more about him and his work at his website, drdennisrebelo.com. Rebelo is spelled R-E-B-E-L-O. Enjoy. Dr. D, welcome to the School for Good Living.
Well, thank you for the invitation. It's wonderful to be here, Brilliant.
Yeah, I'm so glad you are. Will you tell me, please, what is life about?
Well, I think underneath it all, it's a story formation process. Now, that's the short answer.
Yeah.
Yeah. And some of it is done unto you, or apparently feels that way. And some of it is initiated by you.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell me about yourself.
Yeah. So great question, right? Yeah. Spinning it onto me. So of course, the book Story Like You Mean It is really answering the question at any age and stage. How do you answer this question? Whether it's voiced to you, tell me about yourself, as you just did to me, Brilliant, or whether or not you, maybe you roll into an opportunity to say hello to someone and there's an implied, tell me about yourself, right? So I'll tell you about me. So I am, my father, Jose, is my grandfather. He gave me that lovely watch through my father, who is Portuguese. So my grandfather is Portuguese. My mother's side of the family is mostly Irish with some Polish. They influenced me a lot. So my tell me about yourself is really that I was a little bit of an explorer of a kid. And my first dive into understanding other people were through my grandparents, because I could ride my BMX bike to their, in the 80s, of course, to their homes. I had both grandparents and great-grandparents within biking distance. It was probably my first phenomenological interview, right? Understanding people's lived experiences, right?
Yeah.
And as they, I wanted to understand their stories. And so I was a little explorer, but I didn't just interview my grandparents. I loved my bike and I loved jumping it off of jumps and then using my mathematical brain to determine the angle of incident, the tire hitting the jump. This is all pre-X Games. So this is pretty innovative stuff, Brilliant, And so then what I realized is I actually love teaching other kids in the neighborhood how to jump their BMX bikes. Now, this might be far-fetched. You think, hey, I have a professor here in an interview about a book about story. But lo and behold, the teacher within me was really, the fuse was lit when I was back at 11, 12, 13 years old, because I right. And so what was I doing? I was teaching, I was codifying, I was observing, I was receptive, I was analytical, and I was synthesizing. And I was doing it for me, but then I wanted to do it for others so that they could be more engaged in something that was new, that was novel, and that was a bit more complex. And then I as a human being, of course, you have to kind of go on from bike riding and do things like science fair projects. And I had to do a mandatory one at a time where I was in a private school, and I was a little intimidated because I had all these judges that were older than me, and obviously teachers, and of course they had authority. But I really dove into physics, and I learned how to build holograms in my basement. I built a little lab there. So you might be thinking to yourself, wait a minute, this is a BMX guy who loves physics, and now he's doing story pathing. He's teaching people public speaking around their own story. Well, lo and behold, I was actually a bit of a teacher then too. What I learned to do was teach people older than me about this science fair project that had lasers and optics and holography, how it was or could be useful to the FBI to perfect or evolve their fingerprint identification system, which led me to the Department of Energy. And lo and behold, again, the teacher theme emerged. So when I started my first business after working in a military academy, I realized that the answer to being a really effective entrepreneur is teaching. And to be a good leader, you must be a good teacher. And then I would look for the most difficult things for people to do. And lo and behold, it wasn't physics. And it wasn't explaining your science fair project. It wasn't in any engineering, although I guess you could say it was engineering a better way to organize one's story at work. So human beings at work became my new science fair project. And I wanted to crack the code as to how people felt more engaged at work, whether they were a leader, mid-manager, or someone in transition. That is to say, somebody who was moving along and trying to transfer their skills out of the military, for instance, or into a family business after leaving a family business. So how do you transfer that provisional identity claim? How do you do narrative accounting? So really what I am is I'm a pioneer quester teacher on the fringe of university life, because I am a full-time professor who has dedicated his life to cracking the code to some humanistic complex stuff, namely storytelling about oneself. The hardest thing to do is to answer the question, tell me about yourself. So BMX rider, turn science fair project, turn organizational person who specializes in helping people tell their stories. And I do that in Zoom rooms, through Navy ships, or on Navy ships by way of my learning programs that are remote, and in boardrooms. And I have to say, I think that's my story path.
Now, thank you for sharing that. And you mentioned it about how difficult it can be to answer that question. Tell me about yourself, or to tell our own story. And I'm reminded too, by the way, and part of what you said about teaching, right? About being an effective entrepreneur, being an effective leader is about teaching. And that totally resonates with me, because my dad, he passed 12 years ago, but before he died, he would say that the second responsibility, the first, incidentally, was to protect the legal and financial well-being of the company. That was every employee, regardless of position or tenure, had that responsibility. But number two is to be a teacher. That was what he established as our culture. So that totally resonates with me. But then back to this thing that you're saying about, answering this question, who are you? Tell me about yourself, that kind of thing, that is so hard. Why is that so hard for us to do?
Yeah. So look, one of the reasons why is that, and by the way, that's what really sparked this whole, not obsession, but near obsession with trying to create an apparatus, and then ultimately creating an apparatus or a system for organizing through a model, how people can, because the book is really a manual that presents a model for individuals who are reading it at any age or stage. You could be a 16-year-old Cambodian English second language learner person. You could be the head of a family enterprise. You could be just deciding that you want to be a teacher for real and leave financial tech. And you should be able to go through this method to recraft your narrative. But the reason why it's so difficult is because we collect a lot of lived experiences. And when we meet someone, we do no preparation. This is not like getting into the batter's box for real, or shooting a three-pointer, where you've done so much work as a player to step into that box or to release that ball.
Right. And one of the big differences too is that the game it's time bound. There's a beginning, there's four quarters or innings, there's an end. So you can prepare for it, you perform, you leave. Whereas with life and relationships, you're always on.
You're always on, but we never acknowledge mostly that we have to get better at this. We never use our phones to record the answer. Like, I would challenge people in a very positive, loving way right now, with lots of appreciation for wherever you are, listeners. Answer the question, tell me about yourself right now, and answer it, record it in your phone. Then take a moment. Don't beat yourself up. Don't overly defend yourself. Don't worry about any emotions. Just set it aside. Listen to the rest of the podcast. Hit pause now, listen to the rest of it, and then come back to it later. And maybe, just maybe, you can evolve that. So why it's difficult is because we don't acknowledge that we're conscious of a storytelling moment, but we really are. And we don't prep for that moment. So this is the research that I presented at Oxford University in England a few years back. And this is what really was a blast to share. So here it is. If you're thinking about it and you're listening, think about, you show up you're about to roll into an interview, maybe a conference, maybe a meeting, and people are going to go around the room. That's a tell me about yourself. You're going into an interview and you really want the job. Tell me about yourself. You're starting to assume a new position in your job. Tell me about yourself. People want to know, who are you anyway that you deserve this particular position, have authority or expertise. So when we do that, we have an unclear start. This is the research. Unclear start, because we have so many dots in our head, we start to rake through all of them. Which one should I say to brilliant right now to the audience that's about me? And so I have that unclear start. I pause. Then I have a rough unfolding.
And on that start, by the way, to jump in for a minute, do you call that like a story vault? What do you, when you're mentally searching for which ones do I tell? It's the rough start.
Yeah. You're right. Like, you go into the vault. That's exactly what I call it. It's the story vault. And you start to rake through the lived experiences. And you don't really know that you're doing this until I tell you this. Like if you're listening, you're like, oh yeah, I do that too. Right. It's because we don't even reflect that much upon it. But once you do that, so you start to realize, maybe I'll say this to brilliant. Maybe I'll say that to brilliant. And then I look at your nonverbal, your verbal. And then I hurry up and I rush some more. And then I realized what I wanted to say was really not captured. Time, the temporal nature of a dialogue or an introduction, becomes more aware. The person who's to all people, but especially to the storyteller. Mm-hmm. And then you close it up. So Rollo May said, it's an ironic and unfortunate habit that as human beings, we tend to speed up as we lose our way. Boom, there we go. We lost our way. Then we say, oh, I'll get it next time. Well, the reality is you do not have 16 or 17 more times to say, hey, oh, by the way, I kind of goofed up my introduction. Now that I know you more, brilliant, I'll tell you about me.
Yeah, so it is true. It is true that you never get a second chance to make a first impression.
Yeah. I mean, it's a long lasting sort of truth that we all know to be actually verified by our lived experiences. That, we'll see someone years later and they'll say, I didn't know that about you. Yeah. Because as storytellers, as interviewers, as leaders, as human beings, we didn't do the reflection in a structured way. And this doesn't mean rigid, by the way. It means guided, so that you can identify the lived experiences that define you. See, brilliant. This is an inside-outside job. This is about me search. I have to understand what I should be reverent to as a human being. So if I loved my bike. Now, maybe it would be weird for me to say that about my bike. No, because that was my past story was about really overcoming my fear of teaching people something new, which is really the essence of what I did when I was a BMX rider. And then when I released it, I felt liberated. I felt like I had every kid in the neighborhood helicoptering around me in dirt with metal and blocks and bricks to see, how could you jump 10 feet high when you were only 5'2"? How could you then race and beat somebody 30 pounds heavier than you, because you were better at understanding how the clay and the dirt mixed after a rainstorm, right? All of these things, analytical competency, right? Receptivity, and then eventually communication. But I knew that about myself. Why am I mentioning it to you here? Because if I didn't think there was value to that moment in my life, teaching others how to ride a BMX bike in a very good way, then I would say, oh, I'm not sure if he wants to hear that. Yeah. And I would sequester that dot, that blue dot, or that moment in my life. You see, because we're just connecting dots. We're connecting a hero moment to a collaborative to a virtuous. And it sounds fancy, but it really just means something. Hero here is overcoming an obstacle, right? Learning a new language, maybe not second guessing your ability to teach or to speak. collaborative is doing something with others, right? Which I did with my science fair work and, my research. And then getting to virtuous, which is back to self again. So it goes self, other, self, where I say, I absolutely love this thing that I'm doing. It would be immoral for me not to do it. And for me, that's teaching people how to tell their story. It would be immoral for me to stop, as much as it would be immoral for you to stop convening people who could contribute to everyone's existential intelligence, their well-being, and how to have good living be embodied daily, not right. And so that's something that you figured out how to crack the code to convene people. And you do that in so many different ways. So it would be immoral if you stopped and you say, hey, I just want to go do this now. It would feel probably you'd have a somatic bodily reaction. You would feel like you were unliberated. You would feel like the caged man in the metaphor that Rollo May uses in one of his books, right? The caged man metaphor is that a man was caged and put into a village square, and people would look at him, and it was a man. So I'm not, misusing the he, she, they. It was a man in the story, so it's accurate. And what we saw over in the book, he talks about how that person lost their expression of aliveness, and people would look at him less, and he became more of a fixture as opposed to an animated being. So when we think about liberation, this is storytelling for personal liberation. And if I were to squelch who I was as a BMX rider, I wouldn't show you the playfulness of me, the aliveness of me. If I didn't tell you that I did a science fair project, you wouldn't say, wow, he's analytical. You would just say, maybe he got his PhD, he wrote a book, and that's that. But there are a lot of wrinkles to people, and those wrinkles come from the lived experiences. And it's really like dimensionality and depth and aliveness, right, that we see in those formative experiences, which is really to say energy.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is those nuances and those contours and those idiosyncrasies that are not only so compelling, but they're what can connect us to each other, I think. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So much.
So I feel like I interrupted you a little bit in your response to why is it so darn hard to answer this question of tell me about yourself. Yeah. And you were talking about a rough start.
Yeah.
So what are the components of why it's so hard?
So it's so hard. And I gave you, so what I just did for folks listening is I really provided you what's called the Oxford Loop diagram, which is the Oxford Loop diagram is essentially, here's what happens when people try to successfully tell a story. It's hard. So that's why I started there. Now, why is it such a bad diagram? Right.
Well, first of all models are wrong.
Yeah. Well, all models are wrong, but this was extracted from interviews with people who said they were good storytellers. And they told me personally, right, because I was the lead researcher, why it was so difficult. And so everything that I just shared with the listeners and you is about why it's difficult, because we have too much in our head and we haven't pre-reflected on our own identity. Yeah. So I think the short answer would be this. We don't think of our life as having narrative identity as human beings, by and large, Eastern or Western. We a little bit more in different communities and cultures. If we think about why it's so difficult to tell our story, is because the pace, the cadence of our society is quick, and self-reflection to land on those formative experiences isn't really taught at all. It's not taught in guidance counselor offices, college success offices. It's not taught in HR offices. It's not even taught in development work, really. A lot of the work that folks are doing now is really about meaning making and self-expression. So how do you do that? Those are the two most important bits for the modern worker. They want the modern worker, me, you included, all right, we're still modern, we're still working. We want meaning making, yes. And we also want self-expression, but we're not taught how to do that, right? We go to school and we have to raise our hands to speak. Unless you're in kindergarten, then you get the circle. You can stay in circle and it's a little bit more liberal. Then you go to work, you're in a cube, you're in a meeting, you can speak only when spoken to, right? And so we really sort of take away the storytelling muscle from people. Yeah. Right. So
just as you're saying, by the way, not only are we not taught to, we're discouraged from in many cases, right? Unless we're the leader and we get the spotlight, we get the opportunities.
That's right. That's right. And then you can do whatever you want. You can come in late to the meeting and you can pick on people. And, look at people, I think are humanistic. The impulse of a humans is good, but we carry a lot of baggage. So coincidentally, a lot of leaders' behaviors are informed by decades old or decades of reinforcement of behavior that isn't necessarily holistic, right? So it was like achievement only, achieve, utilitarianism. But now we're placing more weight, as we should, on this sort of notion of extreme humanism. And that is not to say that you don't do work, you're not just soft. It just means that you're aware of your own awareness and the awareness of others and their engagement in your life. So storytelling, to answer the question at last, is difficult because we don't teach a model. We don't have people go through and actually have an educational experience, a developmental experience, even onboarding people into an organization. That is the richest time where we give people storytelling latitude. But no, I have not yet heard of an organization that says, let me tell you how you can tell your story. Do this, tell your story so that you're validated as you enter our organization, so that your the ethos of the organization is made better and more purified. Now, I've seen evidence of it here and there. My work at Alex and Ani during the beginning days, absolutely. My work helping out with Tony Shea over in Zappos, absolutely. But I was in these fringe areas of the learning village doing this work. So I think that we're going to get to a point where our ability to tell our story with all these digital digressions is going to require discipline and a system. And that's why I wrote the book.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think you're right about, the reasons that it's challenging, and probably more, right? Because one of them we didn't talk about, you touched on it a little bit, but about the context is shifting too. Who am I talking to? Where are we? What's the purpose I'm trying to achieve, right? And then does all of that contribute to the psychological safety and so forth? So there's context shifting. So like all of those things. And I'm really amazed at this because in the coaching I do, right? Where coaching is always, for me, the starting point is always, what do you want? Which is it's hard to answer in many cases as tell me about yourself or who are you, right? But then when we're able to get some clarity on what would you want, how would you know, what would it look like, this kind of thing, invariably, like people seem to jump to, okay, what's my strategy? What do I have to do to get what I want? But what they neglect to see is who do you have to be? What is the identity that you have to have, right? Because what we do follows naturally, necessarily, inescapably from who we are, who we know ourselves to be. That's right. So what I'm really intrigued by your work because it's all around identity. The stories we tell are intertwined with our identity. Yeah. And that is so amazing that we can actually shift our identity through a declaration, but we also want or often feel like we need evidence. Oh, I'm not an author. I haven't written a book yet. Yeah. But one of the things I'll challenge people is I'll say, look, was Michael Jordan a champion before he ever won at North Carolina or before he ever won an NBA championship? Like, are champions before they have the hardware to prove it, kind of thing. I know I'm kind of riffing a little bit on this thing of identity, but would you talk about the role or the relationship of identity to the stories we tell?
Yeah. So riff away, brother, riff away. Right? Because this is the essence of being. We shape our identity based on us as learners and teachers. So as a human being, you're a learner and you're a teacher. So I did some work with Tony Dungy in helping him with his story, unpacking it for the Sports Mind Institute, which I founded with a couple of sports executives and a family business person. And I don't have an interest in it now, but it was a wonderful journey. And, he wrote a book called The Leader Mentor, right? Like the mentor leader, pardon. And I want to introduce this concept here in our dialogue that if you're a learner, so we'll get away from Tony for a minute. I love you, Tony, but not right now. Just you were a bridge to this. When you are living, you are learning, right? And when you are learning, you are living, right? So now that's not just a trite saying. You could say it in a very quick way at a speaking moment, and people think, oh, that leader's clever. But how do you help people do that? And that's the missing link. So how do you use self-reflection to help people take inventory of moments in their life and then grab 1, 2, 3 on the hero side, 1, 2, 3 on the middle, collaborating, creating something with others, and 1, 2, 3 on the virtuous side, which is loving this thing. How do you get that to happen? Well, every human being, this is a presumption that I make, is capable of learning. They're capable of also applying science in their own life, because experience, as Edmund Husserl said, experience itself is not science. You have to have science, right? It is not evidence. You have to have science to really construct something. Science, the word science just means to cut something up. It means to cut up. So if you can cut up an experience and be analytical, then you can understand what's called the essence of it in phenomenology. Now, phenomenology is the study of the mind through subjective lived experiences. And from a social science standpoint, that's what I use to do my formal research. But what I wanted to do with this book is to ensure that a 16-year-old could find that they wanted to study African American studies by thinking about a moment when she was watching her brothers argue about rap songs and the etymology of certain words in them. Now, that's really cool, but it also helps somebody who might be good at math and accounting and finance figure out a moment in their life where they help their parents balance their books as immigrant parents who owned a variety store in New York City. So everybody has lived experiences that if you go back to them, you can start to connect the dots in your life, but you have to be reverent to the fact that you are an interpreter of those moments. And it's not a season of things. It's a moment. It's the time when you sat and looked at your father and said, Dad is really sick. And I know exactly what happened. That moment, brilliant, that is a formative experience. That's a blue dot, right? That's like, boom, impressioned on your mind. And you're reverent to it when you convey your sense of identity as a coach, a convener of others who care about humanity and are actionable in their orientation to helping others. So when if you did not include that moment, imagine, is your essence really conveyed? No, it's just, I really have resource to do good media about things that I know the world needs, and I'm doing it now. Well, that's a flat story, right?
Yeah, not a lot of contour in that.
Yeah, not a lot of contour. And we want people to be great at something because of something. And we want to know that something as human beings. And so what you do as a human being, when you have honored yourself by doing the real discovery work, and not just discovery work, folks, I'm not just saying you just search. You search by having a methodology, a guiding system, just to orient you, not to create rigidity. Then what you've done is you've given yourself a little bit of flex structure to the process. And that allows you to be able to accomplish the goal of finding those moments. And you can create storytelling worksheets as the book goes on to help you connect the dots, find themes, so that over time, when you look at yourself, and it's wonderful to see people do this, by the way. I mean, I love to watch people get to the point where they say, wow, I'm a tireless advocate for social justice, or, and they can see the theme in their life, right? And so as a listener of that story, or whatever the archetype that emerges is, as listeners, we want to do something for that individual. We want to endorse their next interview, introduce them to someone who can help them with a grant. We want to do that. We invest
in their company, be a shareholder, work for them or with them.
Absolutely. Right. And so we have that natural tendency to do that. And we want to see good artists, great artists. We don't want to see musical artists and performing artists that are mediocre. So we want to hear great storytellers, but without methodology for writing the lyrics of it, if you will, to stay within that metaphor. We end up not having engaged conversations, which means relationally, I can't endorse you and help you. So we lack the capacity to be advocates for others as a society, community, organization, family, because we don't honor the person's ability to autonomously, right, to self-drive that narrative that they're capable of, because we don't give them the tool to help them do that, right? Oh. And so that's where to me, everything starts to light up. It's like, whoa, this isn't just about getting the job. It's about forming the relationships, right? It really energizing the mission, okay? And shifting community where we can watch people thrive, and not just in the sense of shake a rattle at it, sort of like light, sort of, oh my God, I want you to thrive. And I'm not making fun of anybody who sounds like that, but this is using science to forward action, right? That changes being, that changes the way relationships start to shift inside organizations. Again, family, friends, in the middle, recreationally. And I feel like this life is a good life now, right? I can have good living, but I can't have it without understanding my own narrative.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm reminded of something, and I've looked for this just on a few Google searches, and I've never found it. Maybe I'll hire a researcher to track it down. But it was this idea I learned as an English major, right? English majors study a lot of Freud, surprisingly. But it was this idea that Freud had advanced, that if someone couldn't tell his or her own story, that was part of being unwell, right? That it was people who had fragmented or disjointed or absent stories were those who were ill. And I was like, that's really an interesting thing. And in my own experience, I came across something that the author Barry Lopez said. I don't know if you've read this quote about, sometimes a person needs a story more than food to stay alive. And even when I hear that now, like, something in me moves. When I first read that, I cried, because it resonated so deeply and I know there's so many people on this planet that are living wondering if there's meaning inherent in the universe, or if it's even possible, for them to find. And it's so amazing that despite all of the progress we've made, every one of us is faced with this identity of meaning. And what's remarkable to me, as I've discovered, is that we can bring meaning to life through the stories we tell, the identities we create, but we often don't do that. It's like having a glass of water that's on the table and we're dying of thirst, but we don't reach out,
Yeah. First, a wonderful quote that you cited as well. It's very moving. And that's because we yearn for a sense of purpose and understanding of self. Why am I here anyway? So Howard Gardner talks about the types of intelligences, and the types, right? The 9 are now 11. And, so existential intelligence, right? Rhythmic intelligence, musical intelligence. We have deposits of all of them. But the existential is something that has been a bit neglected, right? We don't create organizations to have space for contemplation of it, and then for making it practical. See, a part of the reason why I wrote the book is the phenomenologists and social scientists and psychologists that I see in the academic world, who I love and spend time with, because they are doing good research, whether it's in Oxford or in Ottawa or wherever. I like to move to practice. I like to jump the bike.
Yeah.
Okay. You see, right? I like to race the car. Okay. So because that's where you see whether the construct is convertible as researched, and in fact is very informing of research and is called grounded research. So my practice has always informed me. So the book might have 12 pages of citations that nobody will even read. Well, that's good. I don't care about that. I want you to be able to tell your story. So again, this conversation actually reminds me of why I wrote the book, and why I have to continue to proclaim the need for institutions and organizations to implement ways to do this sort of work, whether the person's a wealth manager or a salesperson. Why are you here? If I ask a person that at an organization and they can't answer it, it's probably that their engagement is very low.
Yeah.
Well, right. And it could be high if they just had opportunity to explore it. Right. And it doesn't matter. I remember one time I was working for this organization, and they said, and I mentioned it like very lightly in the book, a senior person in this organization said, "Hey, Dennis, you're spending far too much time trying to help these people. You have to understand, they're only X kind of people. They don't need any more education or help trying to figure out anything. Just leave them alone. They're not learners." And that's when I cried.
Wow.
Okay. Because brilliant to me, like, this person had written them off, and this was a top person in the organization responsible for a lot of what we were doing. And I thought to myself, this is terrible. But then, of course, I look at it as a formative experience, and I say, oh, this is teaching me something, right? That I need to be more clever about how I get good content into people's hands so they can build learning programs and experiences and have the latitude to do so. So that, so I had to write the book to be very digestible, very much like something that people would read 2 or 3 pages and they would want to read more of it, and they wouldn't look at it as anything related to an academic anything.
Yeah.
And that's really important, right? To democratize good content, or else we're really sequestering it only for the wealthy folks or well-to-do folks or well-earned folks who can pay for private executive coaching around storytelling.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And, part of what you said just a moment ago about, telling our story and it moving people to want to support us or engage with us in some way. I don't think I'd ever seen this until now, but we're doing others a service when we communicate who we are, or what our life is about, or what we're up to, right? Not just helping ourselves, but we're actually helping them to advance. And if we see our work is bigger than ourselves, if it's about whatever, climate change, or about animal welfare, or about, alleviating poverty and increasing shared prosperity, like especially, and there's where you're talking about that virtuous, the collaborative and the virtuous, then we're actually doing others a service in that way. But I'm reminded again of how confronting that can be, because one of my mentors is Dr. Marshall Goldsmith, right? Formerly, he's retired now, but considered the world's top CEO coach. And when he would mentor me and other coaches, and he would say, pick the thing that you're going to be the world's leading expert in, and then just announce it over and over and over. And, that's worked for him. And I remember when we were at a program where he encouraged us to do that. And I went back to my hotel room and I got my dry erase marker out and I wrote on the bathroom mirror, I am the world's leading expert in blank. And I stared at it for like the 3 days, that were left in the conference. And I never filled it in because it felt like it would have been a lie, or maybe it was too much work, or what if I find something later that I'm actually more passionate about? Right. So maybe, what do you say to people about really making a declaration, like a bold declaration about who they are in the world?
Yeah. I say, give me evidence of it. So if you don't have evidence of it yourself, you proclaiming it is in fact just what you felt, empty.
Yeah.
So, which is why when folks go through building what we call in the book a peak story, it has this aspiration, but you're showing 3 dots baked into the narrative, right? And right, in other words, whatever they might be, right? So in other words, each blue dot. So we hear the phrase, "I connected the dots finally."
Yeah.
Right. I always say, "Well, I'll be the judge of that," right? Yeah, or maybe your listeners will, but that's what we want people to do. But what dots? So for you in that moment, you didn't have any evidence, which is cognitive development, that you were going to be whoever you were going to be in the blank, as you put it.
Yeah.
But if you had evidence through overcoming an obstacle yourself, and it was formative, you would know what mental muscles you used, exploration, creativity, what motivations you had, what people were around, the power of place, where was it? And then you would be able to say, oh, and here's how I collaborate with people en route to, oh, wait, this is what I want to do. Now, we can still get there to meaningful work, but I want to accelerate it. And I want you to be better at it, whoever you are out there, right? And so, again, that doesn't work when you don't have cognitive development as part of it, which I had to think about. Because to get to self-authorship, you have to have cognitive development, according to Baxter Magdola, and I agree with her. And you have to have, which informs you, your intrapersonal development. To answer the question, who am I anyway? Right. Yeah. So if I don't have any evidence of who I am, I certainly can't answer this question. So cognitive development leads to intrapersonal development that allows me to do relationship choosing and sustained relationships. That's interpersonal development. If you have high amounts of each, evidence and knowledge of self, and then knowledge of the kind of relationships you want, then they're like three diagrams in, the Venn diagram formation. And in the middle, self-authorship appears. But you need the increasingly higher amounts of each one to feel that liberation that I can self-author, I can interpret. And you also need a bit of a structure, which she didn't do in her model because she was theoretical, was ever put it into action. So I'm using her stuff in giving her applause, duly so. But at the same time, what I want to address is your ability to tell your story.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's part of what I appreciate about your book. As you said, it's structured. It's not rigid, but it's structured. So it gives us some very specific questions. It gives us a process to follow. So part of what I want to ask for the benefit of the listener now is about if someone buys the book, right? As you talk about, people can hire you, they can work with you in some cases one-on-one, or they can bring you into an organization. But obviously, the book will outlive all of us, yeah. and it can be scaled in a way that a one-on-one engagement isn't. So where I'm going with all that is, if someone reads the book and they want to do everything you're saying, what should they expect? What will it look like in terms of time, in terms of effort, in terms of difficulty, this kind of thing? What's that like?
Yeah. So, I would say that so the quick answer is, right, it varies, but let me tell you what I've learned from feedback. I had a psychologist from the Netherlands redo her website in 4 days. And she changed all of her stories. She said all of her stories were not signaling to her audience who she really was. And after reading the book, it felt that she was being disingenuous. Right. So she did it in 4 days. Now she has more control over her schedule. She was super motivated. I've had some people take 3 or 4 months to do it. Others, a couple of weeks. Most people, fortunately, have really been struck by how easy it is to use the system. But then where they slow down is when they have to think about what moment, and they follow the exercises. So that varies for people, right? And it can be really fun too, by the way. So I would say that it varies, but I've seen anything from 4 days, 3-4 days. Someone who has free time and is motivated to 3 or 4 months. Some people who had the pre-release copies, took a little longer. I think depends on how much of a lived life you've had. If you're, there are a lot of variables in people's lives. I'm often so energized, I guess, by the youth of the world and what they're capable of seeing. And but the book isn't biased to one population, and that took a little arguing a bit with some publisher types, because I said, they typically ask Brilliant, what would be your avatar? And right. I said, come on, am I supposed to say a private wealth manager who sells for a living? I don't want to do that, because to me, the methodology and the language to teach through the book and help through the book and guide through the book had to be relatable cross-generationally and cross-culturally. So if you can, and I think we've done that. So the answer is 4 days to 4 months.
Right. And you touched on this a little bit as well, but who is the book really best for? Is there a certain, stage in life? Is there a certain, is it an entrepreneur? Is it a leader? Is it somebody just starting out, after college or something? Who stands to benefit the most from this, do you think?
So it's always the motivated person.
Yeah.
Right. So and how do you get motivated to rethink your narrative?
Pain.
Yeah. Pain. So I might not have enough money for ... I better dive in and fix the way I interview. I have this is the first time I've ever been promoted after trying for so long. This has to work.
Yeah.
Or I'm moving across the country and I'm going to take public transportation and sell all my cars and, use it all to buy a house. When I meet my team, I need to stand out. I need to be who I'm really meant to be and to become, right. And so those are, Warren Bennis, and I reference this quote from Warren, who's no longer with us, but he once said, becoming a leader is synonymous with becoming yourself. It's precisely that simple, yet also that difficult, right? Yes. So if a person wants to become themselves, to really answer your question, right? And they appreciate that it might be a little bit of work. If you put the work in, as my friend Chris Draft would say, who's a lung cancer advocate, who is one of our coaches, it will work out. But he was a former NFL person, played in the NFL for 12 years and went to Stanford. So West Coaster for sure. And he always says, your story to work out, you have to put the work in. It's no different than being in the NFL. You want to be in it for 2 years? You want to be 6, or do you want to be 10 or 12? You have to put the work in for it to work out. So there is effort. There is effort, and don't tap out on yourself.
Yeah. So I realize that you've conveyed the answer to this, maybe at least in parts, in response to some of the other questions I've asked. But what are the benefits that someone could expect to enjoy once they've put that effort in? How is life different?
Wow. It's, you're at ease, to witness, whether it's in a retreat format or somebody who is in a more corporate setting, or even in my network of colleagues who do coaching, working collaboratively, and to witness people who are part of a convened, some gathering, and to witness people breathe differently, right? I mean, one of the benefits that you can see immediately is not just the ease in their storytelling. There's not that unclear start and rough unfolding. It's also that their breath, right? Everything is breath, right? And there's no rushing in the cadence. Their aspiration is really quite lovely. And you can feel that resonance, a bit even on a Zoom, when someone is in tune with their narrative. It's not this schizophrenic thing where you don't know who I am, but I'm projecting this thing. It almost seems like a marketing message. There is, you fall into your breath in yoga, right? Yeah. And you do the same with your story.
Oh, that's beautiful. And it reminds me, I don't even remember who told me this, but when they said it was like a light went on, when they were talking about charisma, and whether charisma is something that some people have and others don't, or whether we can cultivate it and what it even is. And the suggestion was made that what charisma really is simply authenticity. It's simply being comfortable in our own skin. Maybe to say another way, that we know our story, that we own our story, that we live our story. And that, just like you're saying, when people are drawn to us, people want to help us. Well, that's charisma, right?
The essence of charism. I mean, it's a wonderful word, but the essence is that you have me focused on you, right? And that charism, right? Just right? It sounds like magic, right? Yeah. Because you put the work in. And your story works out for you as an individual. And I witnessed that. If you played the wrong instrument and you were supposed to be playing the clarinet, but you're playing the sax or trombone, it would seem like a little weird. You'd breathe funny or in a funny fashion, and you probably wouldn't sound so good. And so is the story that you may be telling not actually be tuned to you. And so that's what's really important. And, the other benefit is that you get the job that you want, you get the relationships that you want, and you live each moment during the day, each block of minutes in a way that is guided quietly, because you have this sort of etched narrative on your mind, and it changes the way your brain works. I mean, from a neuroscientific standpoint, you've added relevance to different key moments in your life. And now when someone calls you into story, you're able to activate episodic tellings, variations of the telling, where if you and I are going back and forth, I'm not going to lose my place because I know my second dot to my third dot. And so I can give space to honor you in the exchange. But we've all witnessed people step on people as they're supposedly in dialogue. Well, dialogue means dia, to pass through, logos with meaning, your lips. So how can I have true generative dialogue with someone if I'm not aware of my own narrative? And then when I feel anxiety or concern that I'm going to lose my train of thought and that I have to control the rhetoric, that is very, even saying it makes me not feel good.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, for sure. Well, and you talk about, I love the way you say this about put the work in, your story works out. And obviously, this is something you've been doing for more than a decade, talking about story. And so you've put work into this. And one of the things I want to ask you about, you talk about in one of your TED Talks about the Manifesto. Will you talk about the Manifesto? And then there's one part in particular I want to ask you about. But what is that? And what function does it serve? Why did you create it? Like all of that.
Yeah. Well, it was a bit of a moment where I was, this was probably 8 years ago almost, I guess. I was about to do this TED Talk and I had finished the way I wanted to frame it up because I wanted to use my own life as a reference to this model, which I didn't share at the time in book form. And I said, well, I have to just write down that all the layers of how positive a story can be for a person and for the world and for work and for peace. So I just wrote it, and I wrote it in one iteration, and I didn't edit it. I just wrote it. I wrote it like this, line by line, word by word, in order. And I changed the size of the words as I was writing. And there's very little change in the size of the words from how it's printed in the book.
Wow.
So I just, because I think I saw and felt it, right? That this is a really powerful way to go about life, is to think of yourself as being a person who is going to story like they mean it, which of course is a bit of like the opening of the manifesto itself. And then I put it in all kinds of places. And then I didn't tear it down, but I didn't overly use it. I don't want to say bastardize it, but I didn't overmarket it, but I wanted people to be aware that like, this is your story. So story like you mean it, right? Like this is, and if you're not in character, jump in, and the rest goes on, of course. But yeah.
That's amazing. The one part of it in particular that I was curious to ask more about was this about inspire by doing. And it's the end. It's at the very end, right?
Yeah, it's the end.
Will you talk about that one in particular? Why is that in there? Why did you end with it? What does it mean to you?
Yeah, it's a great question. Brilliant. So it's the punctuation mark. So, spirit, inspire, the word, right? Which is a little bit connected to charism, is by doing. And when you see somebody doing what their rhetoric aligns with, boom, walk, talk, match, right? And doing is behavioral. And we see behaviors as human beings, and we start to observe behaviors, whether we're kids to parents or parents to grandparents, workers, leaders, mid-managers, community members, right? Advocates, teachers, nurses, healthcare professionals, delivery folks. We see behaviors. And when those behaviors are seen, they're learned. And there's no formal schooling. This is beyond. This is like a bit like a unbound college experience, right? You see it, and then you start to, because that's the first form of learning, is by observation, of course, right? And we hear it too, by the way. We hear the person doing it, because we hear everything that comes from it. So we hear their voice in proclaiming that declaration, but with evidence, and then they inspire others by doing. And that embodied performance is akin to that musical performance, right? You're doing that. I see that. I feel that. I'm contributing this behavior to the world, this play, this action, this moment of doing. So everything aligns to it. So then there's not this there's not this proliferation of my identity. I'm not bifurcated. I'm not this way here and this way there, but I have really work-life integration. And that's a means of psychological wholeness, right? And emotional settledness, which, by the way, was the subtitle of my dissertation. So like integrative storytelling is important, but it's inspired by doing. Because storytelling alone is just a wonderful plan, and it's an important one, but the activation of the story is the difference maker.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you're talking about, it being integrated, having integrity.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm reminded of something Werner Erhard says about without integrity, nothing works. So no surprise when our lives, lack that narrative integrity, that our lives don't work.
Yeah. And it feels terrible. I mean, we've all been there, right? We've all had these moments where we're telling a story and we're like, boy, that's not really, I've got to tell this story and be this person, but that's not really who I am. But we don't know how to tap into those moments that define who we are. And we don't set aside those time blocks to actually create, right, that story path. And
Absolutely. And what your metaphor you keep referring to about music, I think is very apt. And there's so much in that, right? About performance and, that we can do it solo or we can do it collaboratively and all this. And you reference a few times Joseph Campbell, the great mythologist and storyteller. But as you talk now, I'm reminded of I love that saying about life as a guy trying to play a violin solo in public while learning the music and his instrument at the same time.
Right. So
and I think I maybe would have been even more apt if he had said naked. But it's a guy standing naked in public trying to learn. But that's how this can feel. That first of all, when I say this, how this can feel of trying to get our hands around our narrative, identify those blue dots, structure them, not in a rigid way, share them with others, right? That life is a dynamic process and we do continue to have experiences and, all this, but so, well, let me just shift and ask you this before we move on to another part of the interview here. What haven't we talked about? Is there anything that before we move to the Enlightening Lightning round that you want to talk about or you think would be a benefit to the listener?
Well, I would just ask listeners to consider, when do you have to tell your story? Like, just think about it for a moment. Take a moment and just think, this is what Brilliant and I are discussing is really grounded. And I know that I want you to, and I would imagine that Brilliant would love for you to identify moments in your life or areas of your life where you have to tell your story and think about it. Think about how you would not change it, but just think about where they are, when they are.
Yeah.
Right. Make a little note of it. Make a little note of, do you bring energy into the room or do you take it out? Right. And it's something that I touch on in the book, that we don't live in a world where we meet other human beings and it's not like, net zero energy situation, like we're measuring, a carbon footprint or something like that. When I leave a person, they've either given me energy or they've taken away. There's never any net. It's netted out at zero. I'm never completely neutral, in other words, because I heard someone's story. I've met someone.
Yeah.
So does your story, if your story is in neutral or it's a little bit tiring for you to say, imagine what it is for others, right? And why not do something about it? Because you're worth it, right? I wrote this book not for me. I wrote it for other people. And I would love for folks to take inventory of where they have to introduce themselves, tell their story, or be aware of their story.
Yeah, I love that. Hearing you say that, I'm reminded of the activist and the author Alice Walker, where she says the greatest, something very close to the single biggest way that we give up our power is by believing we don't have any. And I think there's the corollary to this here is about how we often diminish our own value by thinking we don't have it, that our story is not worth telling. But when we think about the great men and women of history, if we didn't know the story of Rosa Parks, right? If we didn't know nonviolent resistance, from Gandhi, it's like these things, there's the story in and of themselves. And yes, it was based on a fact or something that happened, but that story has power. And we all have that.
And so what you just said, just want to highlight what you just said because it was wonderful. This story happened because of an event.
Yeah.
Aha, there we go. So whether it could be Rosa Parks, it could be whomever, Susan B. Anthony, there are events, and these events, a self-event connection is important to us. We see something in it as a human being, as an observer in the world, as a learner, as a liver. And we say, okay, well, now again, to be conscious of that, you have to go back and be prompted. That's why we poke at you in the book, and we have you do these exercises at the end of the book, the chapters in the book, because we want you to be able to get to those moments so you can be your own psychologist or phenomenologist and build a story, because there is some psychology in here, to be sure. But the idea is to activate a narrative that informs you and informs others as to who you really are. So you can answer that question. Tell me about yourself. And you, every person, right? We all have events. And don't think, please, as a listener, as part of this community or a new member of this listenership, maybe even, please don't think that your story isn't sensational enough. Because when I am in workshops and I recraft someone's story live, they say, oh, I can't believe that's my story. And I can assure you, if you put the time in, it will work out. And you will actually have people say that about you. You know, you'll hear people say, whoa, that story's amazing. And the process is designed for you to activate this story at the end of the book, for sure.
I love that. I love that idea of activating a story. Is really cool. And it is these stories, these experiences is like the water we swim in. They can seem invisible to us, but there is potentially so much power both to enhance our enjoyment of living this story. And I'm just reminded now too, by the way, I know about Alan Watts, you know, the spiritual teacher. I read a few years ago, I read his autobiography, and he talked about how when he was at like prep school or whatever in England, that one of his hobbies with his friends, his group of friends, was to identify the elements of their persona and to like tear it down and construct a new one, and how he referred to himself as a spiritual entertainer. And I'm just so struck by, you know, his facial hair and his robe and all this, that he knew at some level it was just a story he was living. He's made such an impact for so many people. And so again, we can all do that. It doesn't mean we have to follow that path, of course, but we can all be conscious and we can create and we can share and live into that.
Yeah. Well, great teachers can be entertainers, and you can entertain people with your story, and you can entertain yourself with your story. And Alan, I love when Alan, one of his videos and one of his lectures was, starts off with, so what do you desire? What kind of life? Right. You know, he's got that, your really unique voice. And but that's a great question. But I often say, well, you know, how do you know that you desire? How do you know? What evidence do you have that you desire this? Because the ultimate processing unit is your brain.
Yeah.
Right. And so how you are able to tap into it and focus. And I think that's the challenge. And this is to answer a question. One of the other reasons that you asked this question, but one of the other reasons why it's difficult to tell a story is because of focus. So no learning methodology, no apparatus, no tool, no reflection, little focus. So when it's on you, and I think this is why people actually read through the whole book, is that when it's on yourself, we can focus, right? Because we can focus. So I think that's a little bit of the trick in here too. So if you're wondering about those moments that you tell your story and you're wondering, can you get through the book? Just let me remind you that this book is all about you. So it's fascinating.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, thank you for that. Well, if you're up for it, let's go ahead and transition to the enlightening lightning round.
I'm in your hands. I trust you implicitly. So whatever you say, I do.
Awesome. Thank you. And then following that, so again, this is a series of brief questions on a variety of topics. My aim, for the most part, is to ask the question and just kind of stand aside. You're welcome to answer as long as you want. Okay. And then after that, I have just a few questions about writing, your creative process, advice that you might give to others, that kind of thing.
Sounds great.
Okay. So question number 1. Please complete the following sentence with something other than a box of chocolates. Life is like a
story waiting to be understood and lived.
All right. Question number 2. What important truth do very few people agree with you on?
So is this, just to clarify, an important truth that I believe to be true?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I wouldn't say that people disagree with this, but I will say, I will say that sometimes people underestimate the value of their own capacity to create a meaningful story, but they still proceed, right? And so, um, this is, I would say, I'd like to answer the question another way. This is a bit controversial, maybe, but I would say that I'm going to flip this. Brilliant. I would say most people are going to believe what I'm going to say, but many leaders don't want to listen to this. That the development of human capital through self-exploration within the workplace is a missing link to engagement and meaning making, essential to evolve the vibe of companies. And that to skip that is to really ignore human potentiality, but also to disable merit-based outcomes. So now, why do I say this? Because leaders tend to nod and say, I honor the human side of the enterprise, but I don't want to put the work in. And it's a millennial issue. It's a generational issue. And so I would say that most younger folks would agree with what I'm saying. Of course, Chip Conley would say, who I know has been on the show, would say, this is wonderful. There's wisdom at work now, and people can be modern elders. I do think it's shifting to that. But there's still a bit of this old school, non-McGregor, non-Douglas McGregor orientation where folks still try to control. So this is, and I'm going to try to demystify it. There are 5 power bases. You can have position power, expert power, right? You can have referent power, which is likable. And you can have coercive power, and you can have reward power as a leader. And most leaders, when I ask them, hey, what would you like to be known for? Expert, let's take position out of it. Let's look at 4, because you presumably have the position that you're supposed to have and you have the authority. What are the 2 that you wish you were known for? Everyone always says, every leader almost predominantly says, I want to be known for knowing something, and I want to be known as likable and approachable, referent power. And I'll say, okay, when time is of the essence and you have to, which do you go to? They bow their heads almost shamefully, right? Brilliant. And they say, well, sometimes coercive or reward. So what the issue is typically is a lack of programming on the educational side within HR, HRD. And most HR people will say, we do a good job, but their voice says, no, we don't. And we know it. Yeah. So that's my answer.
Okay. Thank you for that. And what's the basis of those 5 types of power?
So this is a great book. Is called, it's written by Daft. I think it's Richard. And it's called The Leadership Experience. Great book. And the leadership power basis, where a leader gets power, is usually for position. Right. So if you actually have the title that is from the president, that you should be the senior vice president of finance, then that's power. You can be expert or knowledgeable, or even guru, but that's all about knowledge. You can be also referent, so likable, approachable. People just want to do things for you. That's oh yeah, right. I want to be that kind of leader. And then there's coercive, getting punished, and reward, getting the goodies and the carrots. And so that's a model that is pretty much universal, that a way of thinking about, of course, it's a little bit limited, but it's how people can relate in a workshop very nicely, or in an academic class, or even a retreat, that, hey, yeah, I can identify, I have this power base, but I want to develop this one. Now, the question is, how do you develop them? Through your story, right? So that often when I'm teaching a leadership through storytelling, it's developing that narrative in putting those dots in order so that you can create approachability and likability. So knowing your audience, understanding your intention, and to your point earlier, knowing context and that contextual influence of the storytelling, because context is the environment or the arena for the storytelling.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And as you talk too, I'm reminded now of the fact that when we tell a story, we can invite others into it. But if we never tell the story, there's nothing to invite people into.
Bingo. And okay, so now you're getting me lit up again. So this creates what's called an LMX, a leader member exchange, right? And so to go to and fro, back and forth, is wonderful. It allows for positive quid pro quo, sharing through what psychologists call the Johari window, where you open the blinds and you share parts of your life back and forth, leader, follower, leader, member, leader, leader. But in the literature, it's called leader member exchanges. And if you want to enhance the to and fro of those and the mutuality of those, that can create wonderful resonance within an organization or in a team. So yeah, well done. And also what happens is that it becomes like a plasma that surrounds the experience. So now like my story moments and your moments start to flow into this plasma. It's almost like the goop. It's like almost like, think of Jello with all the experiences that go back and forth. And now the plasma is developed by you and me.
Yeah.
Right. And so we've generated this experience, which is really an encounter, because now you have done some revealing to me and me to you in a way that's relevant, prevalent, and sense-making given your role. Wow. That's the good stuff. Then we do things for each other. We work harder, more deeply. We approach with less fear and trepidation, because I know, brilliant, well, he'll answer my email or he'll talk to me for 5 minutes on the fly, because we had that conversation that we co-generated. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Awesome. Thank you for that. Okay. Question number 3. If you were required every day for the rest of your life to wear a t-shirt with a slogan on it or a phrase or saying or quote or quip, what would the shirt say?
Everybody's work matters.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. Question number 4. What book other than your own have you gifted or recommended most often?
Well, I'm really concerned about generations at work, because this is the time where we have 5 generations at work. And it's the first time ever. I have to say, I have gifted Chip Conley's book to quite a few people. I find it really important to elders that they realize that they don't have to be quiet and not speak because other people aren't speaking, and that they can have that heart of an intern and feel self-affirmed by sharing their story and being vulnerable. But likewise, that young people can also, or younger people, or even, mid-career people can become more sensitive to what can be gained across the generations as well. I think that's a really rich area of research and study.
Yeah, absolutely.
I will say one other book,
Sure.
The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. I think people don't realize the social cues that trigger behaviors that need to be replaced by other routines than the ones that aren't serving them.
Yeah.
And, so I do a little bit of a rip on that, but I like that book as well.
Awesome. Me too. Okay. Question number 5. So you've traveled a lot. What is one travel hack, meaning something you do or something you take with you when you travel to make that travel less painful or more enjoyable?
My daughter gave me a little sketchbook years ago. She's 20. I think she was probably maybe 12, actually, when she gave it to me. And I love to sketch in it. So I would say I keep that with me all the time. And some good, one other one that's so I have to answer it with 2. Is that legal? Can I do that?
Absolutely.
Okay. I would say some good jazz. I love some good jazz at the ready. Good jazz music. Man, that sets me straight.
Awesome. What's something that you've been enjoying recently, or what are some of your go-tos or your favorites?
I really love Greg Porter. He's a great lyricist. He's more of a modern jazz guy. I think he's fantastic. At the Newport Jazz Festival, we were able to see him live. But I love some underground Coltrane too, to take me away, and to really practice contemplation and wandering, really letting go. And, there's a guy, Daniel Bennett, who is the associate director of the New York Jazz Academy. He's fantastic. He's a clarinet player, flute, and sax, and he's a wonderful teacher too. So, and he's really funny. So he does things that are a little unusual. I would say, I think that Chet Baker all the time, right? Like I could listen to Chet and probably do every morning. Almost, I bet for 60 to 70% of my mornings start off with some Chet Baker in the mix.
Wow. Now I'm going to have to check all that out. I took a music appreciation class that focused on jazz many, many years ago. But beyond that, I haven't listened to much, but you've inspired me now to go back and explore a little more.
Cool.
So thank you. Okay. What's one thing? So this is question number 6. Mm-hmm. What's one thing you've started or stopped doing in order to live or age well?
Oh, I don't really drink. I'm no good at it, as it turns out. The less I did it, I think that that's really important for me. I didn't ever declare it as the worst thing in the world, but I don't know. I just started removing it a little bit, and I'm a vegan, so I'm 100% plant-based. And I'm not one of those people who run around trying to convert people. So I want to, just clarify that. But a person I met and friend, Rich Roll, when I was in Vegas, he was telling a story, and I was prepping some people for storytelling at the Learning Village. And I heard his story, and I said, if Rich can be a vegan, I can do it for a couple of weeks. And that has really helped me tremendously.
Wow. How long has it been that you've practiced veganism?
I would say 7-8 years.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's and I, the Portuguese people in my family thought I was, a little wild, because some of them had owned one of my great aunt, my tia, as it were. She owned a sausage company. Very innovative entrepreneur field. In the 40s, I think she started that business. And so for me not to eat meat was considered a little odd in that part of our family tree.
Yeah. I mean, not eating meat, many people, I think, view it as un-American.
Yeah. And, I've converted my father to some vegan dishes, which I thought is really good. So that's helped me maintain my energy for sure. And I still bike, but I would say definitely the veganism, and, I'm not a big drinker. I think that helps too.
Right on. Okay. Question number 7. What is one thing you wish every American knew?
Philosophy. I think that we're absent philosophers. I mentioned this a little bit in the book, that, the method that I share was inspired by, to become a philosophy for living. So after you're done with your story, it's an apparatus or a way of organizing or thinking about your life, because you're a dot collector. You're always going to do stuff, right? Hopefully, right? And you're going to be engaged in the world. So as you're engaged in the world, it's important to understand how these experiences are ordered and weighted and contribute to your sense of self-worth and sense-making. And that's philosophy, is how you think.
Yeah.
So whether it's this method, another method, I think embracing a philosophy is key.
Awesome. Okay. Question number 8. What's the most important or useful thing you've ever learned about making relationships work?
Calling out mistakes quickly.
Your own or your partners, or?
Yeah, I would say so. All right. Now you've added a little bit of a spin to that pitch. I would say it's, for me, originally, I was answering the question that if I'm goofing something up, I'll catch it right away. Mm-hmm. And not letting it go, and not worrying about saving face, but saving face by being human. Mm. Like if I see, like back in the day when I first started training adults who are a lot older than me, 20 and 30 years older, I knew what they were doing was a goof up. Right. And so I might have maybe I'd push them a little bit on it. Right. And I realized that, in other words, if somebody were misspeaking or not being very good at something, I would kind of be a little bit of a wise guy. I'm going back 15, 20 years. And I realized that with some people, based on their baggage, that humor, they didn't really understand the intention of it. Right. So calling myself out quickly and saying, hey, my Portuguese family is big on humor. So if I'm being too goofy with you, let me know. And typically people would start to laugh. and it would be fine. But it would also was telling the truth. Like that was the origin of some of my early techniques to engage people on topics such as public speaking and being evaluated on their public speaking. And now I'm a little less humorous, although I think I still can be funny, and I'm more around the fidelity of the model to help people just witness their own greatness as a public speaker. To answer that question, tell me about yourself. And so I would say, if you make a mistake, call it out quickly. I mean, I know that or if you think somebody has mistaken your intention, call it out quickly.
I love that. Okay. Question number 9. Aside from compound interest, what's the most important or useful thing you've ever learned about money?
As a creator, so this is not to cite Ayn Rand or Fountainhead or Atlas Shrugged, but there are really a couple of camps when it comes to creating. Either now, if you're an Ayn Rand fan and you've read Fountainhead or Atlas Shrugged, you know the objectivist philosophy or the philosophy of objectivism, which is that you're either, essentially, I'm summarizing, you're either a creator or you're feeding off of a creator, right? Now, I'm going to answer your question. So I think about that once in a while because I think, is that really true? And I think what I think about that is that creativity deserves money, whether you're a mural artist or whatever you do. So I would say that if you are creative, I bet that that's tied to compensation because your time and talent that turns into a behavior in a relevant space and place deserves money. And accepting that is sometimes a challenge for people. You know, the first time I've ever charged a handsome fee, so to speak, for, years ago for a stipend to speak, it feels a little weird, but that I don't have a lot of money reluctance, so I have no problem now. But I think that for others and for myself sometimes, and for others probably more than me, because I had a great teacher in my grandmother who's still alive and about to turn 96. Wow. She taught me about money, and she would sit down and do the books for her business in front of me while I was eating some, really amazing food that she also created, by the way. And she went to Rhode Island School of Design and took a couple of buses to get there as a Portuguese woman who had probably 2 or 3 kids at the time. And so, creativity is powerful, and creativity and money are interwoven. So if you're an artist, it's okay to get paid. And if you're an entrepreneur, make sure that you're creating something because you'll get paid. And if your story is told well, you'll be compensated somehow. Either you'll have less frenetic time and more balance, or more money. So I think that creativity and money are they're not cousins, but they're causally connected. And maybe not like Ayn Rand said exactly, but there's a deep connection there.
Yeah, no, that makes sense to me. And I'm reminded of something I learned when I went through Tony Robbins' Business Mastery. And it's so basic, but it's about value creation. And just like you're saying, if your creativity is adding value to people, that's what do you call this? Tautological? Like that's valuable.
Yeah, that's valuable. And your for your story, it should show value and worth. And if you have more money to do the things that you're loving and good at, you'll become better at it. And then you'll evolve them, and you'll be so expert at it, right, that you'll never tap out or pull the pin or quit because you'll be sought after. So you'll have a reinforcing loop that's called a virtual snowball effect. Because the thing that you're good at, you're getting paid well enough to not worry about other things, which keeps you at the top of the pyramid, the virtuous work, the love work, right? And then the money comes and it flows. Why does it come? Because you assign the ultimate meaning to it. So meaning money. So meaning first, money follows.
Yeah, I think so. That's awesome. Well, speaking of money, one of the things that I have done to express my gratitude to you for making time to share with me some of your experiences and your wisdom today is I have gone to kiva.org, the microlending site, and I have made a $100 microloan to a woman entrepreneur named Paila in Samoa, who will use this money to, she will buy taro and banana. She's 52 years old. She's a widow. She has 2 kids, but in this way, she'll provide a living for herself, her family, and improve the quality of life in her community. So thank you for giving me a reason to do that.
Absolutely. Right on. Right on. Fantastic. Thank you for that.
Yeah,
It's a bonus.
My pleasure. Okay. So although I do have just a few last questions for you, if people want to learn more from you or if they want to connect with you, what would you have them do?
So the website's, I think, quite nice. drdennisrebelo.com is the ecosystem for the book. You can learn a little bit about what folks are saying. You can buy the book there. You can also read up a little bit on me and jump from that to LinkedIn or Instagram or even Facebook.
Yeah, and and we were talking about this before we were recording, that people can also find a reader's guide, like something they could use as part of a book club or in a group that they would convene as well.
Yeah. Thanks for the reminder. There's a free book club guide there, which is you just have to provide your email address, and we just want to know, where are you using it, within an organization, and a very, very easy gated entry. So a couple of fields you fill out, boom, it downloads right away. And what we're seeing, and thanks for reminding me about this. We did this a bit just right before launch, and folks at the Cleveland Clinic are using it. Physicians, I think it's their Physicians Leadership Council. They're using it so that physicians orient themselves to telling their story to their other caregivers, their teams, their people that report up to them, as well as patients. And also, we are seeing it in Germany, France. We're seeing it in, there were quite a few in Texas. We probably have 60 to 70 very active book clubs right now that are using it. And it's absolutely wonderful to see. Actually, I think the Cleveland Clinic started a second one.
That is awesome. Well, good for you and good for them.
Yeah, good for them. Yeah, right on.
Making medicine human again.
Yeah,
that's great.
Can you imagine?
Okay. So the last part of the interview here, just a few questions about how you got this book done, what your habits, routines, mindsets are as it relates to writing and the creative process. I want to start with this. When did you first know you were a writer?
Well, the only way to give you a PhD is you have to develop a dissertation. And it's almost like forced writing, right? Because you make this declaration and you say, I'm on a PhD, you take classes, but eventually you have to create something. So a PhD is a little different than an EDD, which, early on in my life, I knew nothing about the distinctions. But a doctorate that's an educational doctorate usually is 3 years. It's very prescribed, very important work. But a PhD could take you 5 years, 8 years, 10 or 12 years, because you're generating new knowledge. So you're building knowledge. So the first time I knew I could write, I had to really get out of speaking to write, because I was used to speaking professionally, and I did my doctorate work while I was working full time. So I would say then the qualifying essays and then some. When I realized I was going to write this book, I had known that I had been able to tap into a voice that was acceptable to varied people from culturally and generationally. And that I found sort of the fun lane to entertain, engage, and get people to do things that would be good for them. And I did that first by building an online program class that was really the digital book, lots like 42 videos, forms, etc. So people could build their peak story in my public speaking classes and my practice, the work I do supporting people in enterprise. And then the writing really became so much fun, because I had forced myself through the PhD years, and then I played in the speaking world, and then I played in the video world, and then I saw sort of in that triangle what the book had to be like. And COVID struck, and I started writing 30 days later. And I had just come back from San Francisco. I was at Sennheiser to the audio company doing a private event. I was a little nervous, because the word was out that COVID was hitting California. And I started writing, and I woke up every morning. And I had a designated schedule every couple of days. And I scheduled it for myself, and I meditated. I listened to jazz. I sat in a very still way, and I zoned in on each chapter after figuring out the outline. And I just focused on that chapter and getting it all out. And I recorded my notes as I was writing as well. And the power was in the editing, but getting the first version done was done toward the beginning of fall. And then the final manuscript was done December 18th.
Wow. It's a pretty quick timeline to get a book written and published.
I think, COVID opened up a window a little bit, right? I saved on some travel time.
Yeah, for sure. What did you experience was the most challenging part of getting the book written and published, and how did you deal with it? How did you overcome it?
Well, I wanted to make sure I was being inclusive in the book. So I think that was the challenge, but I also wanted people to realize this book has the capacity to change the spoken word that you utter during the day, right? So getting the words right after the first rip through all 10 chapters and making sure they were exactly the way I wanted it. Wasn't being a theorist perfectionist as much brilliant as it was really just making sure that I would tickle people's brains a little bit and that they would have some fun. Like, who wants to read a book and feel like it's rigid and unworkable, right? And so I wanted to make sure that I was using the words in a particular way and also citing researchers in a way that wasn't sounding like a normal citation, but nodding to people who had contributed to my evolving knowledge and the way I developed this model.
Yeah. I know many people think of writing a book as a solitary endeavor, and in many ways it is, but it's also a collaborative endeavor. In some ways, it's maybe closer to filmmaking than we would think. That there is a production team and, other people that come into the process. What did it look like? What did other people's participation in making this book what it is look like?
So my wife knows my work really well. So as you can imagine, when you're in a relationship such as that, and she's an instructional designer. So she was very good at picking up parts of the ordering that would be a really good way to sequence how I was introducing language, so that, we talk about blue dots, you and me, we talk about blue dots but really to the listener, that's a formative experience. That's a strong event in your life, a self-event connection. Well, we load people up with some new language in this book, and doing it in a particular order it had to happen. So she was really helpful. Her name is Shannon. Shannon is just a great thinker, organizer, very amazing organizational competency. So she was very helpful. And I think reading it and with my editor and having the courage to say, no, this word is going to be this, or we're going to remove that. I don't like the way that sounds. That's not really the way, I don't like the way that portrays me. This book isn't about me. It's about the reader, but I have to give them a little bit of me, but I don't want to give them that vibe. So let's change this sequence of words a little bit so that I downplay myself, and not because I just didn't want to be the center of attention in this book.
Yeah.
So that was really important to me. And then reading it to my mother-in-law, who just passed away almost a little over 30 days ago. She had ovarian cancer, Sandy. And Sandra would come down on Tuesdays to work on a quilt with my daughter, which was the final quilt that she made. And she was young. She would ride her bike 10, 12 miles a day, 77, very, much like your dad, didn't make it to the 80s and 90s, right? No. And when and I would read the book to her because she was an educator's educator. And I read the book to her, very, very well read. I mean, would read 5 to 10 books a week. And I would sit with her and I would just read her the book as if it were an audible, tell me about yourself, right? I'd start with a question and I'd get right into it. And I read the first 3 chapters before it became more difficult for her to be able to do it. And it was wonderful. And so, but she gave me a glow in her nonverbal response, and she asked good questions, and it helped me realize the older readers really needs sense making too. And so I had to honor her ear along the way. And then it's being true to yourself and your intention as a writer, well, and think about your own lived experiences. Who are you really trying to reach here? Yeah. And when someone tells you just reach this, you'll sell more books. Is that really what you want to do? Or will the books sell more over time? Because it's right. It's so like balancing that, I'm aware of the business part of it, but I wanted to honor my own identity too. So that was really critical. So the power, as a lot of writers may tell you, would be in the editing.
Yeah, for sure. Tell me about, what was the editing process like for you?
Well, I probably went through the book 7 or 8 times, after I read, did the transcript or the manuscript. And I would wake up the next day and I would think about what I had dove into. And I tried to do it in three chapters at a time, just like a good reading. And then I got to the end during, I would say, the 6th, 7th, and 8th reads. I went right through the book from beginning to end without stopping. So I wanted to make sure that there was this holism to it. So the whole process, that it flowed like there would be nobody calling and saying, "Hey, I don't get what you said on page 112, Doc. What's going on?" I didn't want that. So, I made sure that I did a line by line edit.
Wow.
Yeah.
What tools and technologies were useful to you? What did you find? Was there anything that was indispensable? Anything you tried and you abandoned? What did that look like?
Writing is very different than speaking. Okay. And it's a different language altogether. Both are different. So if you're a good writer, you might not be a good speaker. And they're not mutually exclusive, but they're very distinct.
Yeah.
So I would say that reading aloud is probably the best thing you can do as a writer. You really, it takes a lot of time. It might take you 5 hours, 6 hours to read your book out loud, but you understand whether or not you voted for those words that you just gave voice to, those words that you amplified. And so I use some tools collaboratively that were provided by the publisher so that they could see what I could see, and that when I changed something, I didn't change it and miss it. And those are good tools. And we could have notes on them and whatnot, like, "Hey, I just changed this section. Please make sure that it gets into the final baked copy, the signed off copy." But I think for the most part, the tools are really out there. You just have to do the work. You have to do the work, and hearing your word choices in the sequence of those words, because those words convey the essence of what you want to convey, whatever it is you're writing about. So you have to add voice to it.
Oh, absolutely. And here, you use the word essence, and I know you might not have, it's not necessarily interchangeable with what I might add, which is energy. But I'm curious what your experience has been like, either writing this book or just writing in general, about the fact that in any communication, there's the content, like the literal meaning, but then there is also an energy, or perhaps an essence or an intention or something. What's your experience like of this kind of parallel coding that's present in our communication?
Such a great question. I mean, we see that in email all the time. What's that person's intention? They yelled at me. No, they didn't. So, right. So as soon as we go to the written word, not just in an email, but also in a book, it can come across wrong, right? Without that intentionality or that essence or that vibe, right? Sort of energy, right? That you're referring to. Brilliant. So I tend to lean on this concept that I need to make sure they hear my energy, and that if I'm writing an email, in other words, in regular life, I'll say, "Hey, Brilliant, it was great meeting with you. I'll be flying through Utah, blah, 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 clicky clack." Not to add any pressure to scheduling, and I mean this with positive intent in brackets. Love to connect, thinking of this. That might work too. Share your thoughts. But if I wrote, "I'm flying through Utah, I might be available, share your thoughts. You're going to be like, wow, like I might be available. Well, I'm busy too. Right.
Yeah.
So, but if I add I'm sharing this with positive affect and intent, want to continue our conversation and understanding how the work you're doing is impacting organizations, then I'm adding that. But sometimes you have to remove those brackets when you're writing a book. Right. And I might be speaking about, being live wired to story, as I did when I was talking about Jimmy Allen's story, the Black country singer. And, I think in that section I added, you have a call to story too. Right. And so I have to take it out of me telling you stuff and about someone else and then say, hey, you, hello. Right. And so how we do that in a book is the same. It's like being a good jazz musician. You let people come in and out. Like I might give you music, but then I want your music. I want your saxophone to come in off of my bass, or my bass provides a beat, or you do the bass and I do the sax, and then he does the clarinet and Dallin does, piano. But we all have to kind of shift all around a bit. And so knowing when to do that with the reader, I think helps preserve the energy you wish to convey through the writing.
Yeah. Awesome. So final question. It's really two questions, because the first part is, what else haven't we talked about related to writing, creativity, that you think might be of service to the reader? And that might be the same answer to the second question, which is what advice or encouragement, or it might be different, but what advice or encouragement do you leave those listening with to help them get their own creative books, their own creative projects done, or their own books finished and published?
Yeah. Well, find a grain of sand. Even though we all want a unified theory of existence, or we may want it, and this is presumptuous of me, but I think that people want to understand how all life fits into itself. Find a grain of sand that stands out to you. Find your blue dot related to it. And then bring the future to the present and say, this book, this creative project in action will solve this problem, solve for this in this way, and it will look like this, totally glorious, because boom, 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 and just write off of it. Or
when you say grain of sand, sorry to jump in, but when you say grain of sand, do you mean irritant, like the oyster making the pearl, or what do you mean by grain of sand? So
find the one thing that you tend to wander to when you're. So okay, that's a great question, brilliant. So there are two psychological competencies that will help, I think. One is, so there are 8 total that I talk about in the book too, which is leadership. The opposite of leadership is receptivity. Creativity, the opposite of creativity is exploration. In other words, you need both. They're related, but you can't do them at the same time. Discrimination, which is analytical thinking power. The opposite is being flexible, right? And then organization, knowing how things work, and then being able to speak, communication. So if you turn up your ability to be open, contextually aware, just open, right? It's like pushing myself off in a little dinghy boat or sailboat or raft off in the pond across the street from my house or the lake. I roll out and I'm open to it, wherever I go. But I add exploration, and then I can go to uncharted territories in that lake or that pond. And I say, okay, so openness, that's called contemplative wanderer, psychological archetype. Roy Horan tuned me into that, a friend of mine in Hong Kong. So when you do that, you can find limits to what you want to do because you're open and you're exploring. And you can also find, right, which is a boundary, you can also find opportunities. So it's really important. And sometimes you can do this through a quasi-meditative practice. You can do this through walking, a chi walk. You can do this for take a hike, a jog, get on a bike, lyricless music, and you contemplate and you wander. What is the one thing that should anchor my writing? What is the one project I should pour into that?
I love that. That reminds me of that Swami Vivekananda quote. Take up one idea, make that one idea your life. Think of it, dream of it, live on that idea. Let the brain, the body, muscles, nerves, every part of your body be full of that idea, and just leave every other idea alone.
And I'll add this, inspired by doing.
Yes. So perfect. So perfect. Well, Dr. D, this has been so awesome. I'm really grateful to you for making time. I know you'll be through Utah because it's the center of the universe and everyone comes through Utah for something, whether it's Sundance Film Festival or Silicon Slopes or the Outdoor Retailers Expo or to go to Southern Utah, whatever. But next time you're here, I hope you'll let me know, and I'll do what I can to make sure that we connect if your schedule allows and I'm in town. So, and wherever our paths cross again, I'm really looking forward to staying connected and developing our friendship.
I also am, I'm thrilled with the work you're doing. It's, there are so many different on the fringe opportunities. When I say that, I mean where education meets the real world, where humanistic existential thinking and that is evidence-based or supported through really nice pedagogy, ways of teaching, ways of learning, andragogy, and a mind's eye on the encounter of the learner, right? So that's a conjure aesthete, being able to be creative and use your analytical power to be creative. And when I look at what you're offering, I see your virtuous story in motion. That you are creating something and have created something and gathering and distilling human beings who know the power of this type of learning, teaching, coaching, and how transformative it can be. And so I just want to thank you for the work you're doing as an educator and teacher as well.
Well, thank you. Okay. Well, with that, we'll wrap. And thank you to everyone listening. Hey, thanks so much for listening to this episode of the School for Good Living podcast. Before you take off, I just want to extend an invitation to you. Despite living in an age where we have more comforts and conveniences than ever before, life still isn't working for many people. Whether it's here in the developed world where we deal with depression, anxiety, loneliness, addiction, divorce, unfulfilling jobs or relationships that don't work, or in the developing world where so many people still don't have access to basic things like clean water or sanitation or healthcare or education, or they live in conflict zones, there are a lot of people on this planet that life isn't working very well for. If you're one of those people, or even if your life is working, but you have the sense that it could work better, consider signing up for the School for Good Living's transformational coaching program. It's something I've designed to help you navigate the transitions that we all go through. Whether you've just graduated, or you've gone through a divorce, or you've gotten married, headed into retirement, starting a business, been married for a long time, whatever. No matter where you are in life, this 9-month program will give you the opportunity to go deep in every area of your life, to explore life's big questions, to create answers for yourself in a community of other growth-minded individuals. And it can help you get clarity and be accountable to realize more of your unrealized potential. It can also help you find and maintain motivation. In short, it's designed to help you live with greater health, happiness, and meaning so that you can be, do, have, and give more. Visit goodliving.com to learn more or to sign up today.